It's Wednesday, March 6th, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On Barnstable Today, we learn more about coastal resiliency, municipal preparedness, multi-hazard mitigation, and the tools that the town of Barnstable can use in an uncertain climate change future. Cape Cod Commission's Natural Resource Specialist, Heather McElroy, joins us in studio with updates on the Commission's coastal resiliency work, including NOAA-funded Resilient Cape Cod project, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Planning with Cape Communities, and multi-hazard mitigation planning. Climate resiliency here in Cape Cod, as well as our town, Barnstable, is very, very important. With me today, Heather McElroy from the Cape Cod Commission, and you are a natural resource specialist.
Right.
So first off, tell us a little bit about what a natural resource specialist does with the Cape Cod Commission.
Well, I've done a lot of things over the time I've worked for the county, but the focus here is really on ensuring that our wetlands, wildlife and plant habitat, open space areas are protected. And increasingly over the last few years, we've been focusing on coastal resiliency issues because that's where the action is at the moment.
It is, and let's try to give our viewers the, I guess the layman's definition of coastal resiliency. What does that really mean?
Well, that's a great question. I think different people might answer it in different ways. The way I like to think about it is we are a very fragile peninsula of sand sticking out in the ocean, and our main threats are coming from ocean-related impacts, increased storms and the flooding and erosion that comes along with those storms. So improving our resiliency means taking action now before the storm and the flooding and the sea level rise hits us to put us in a better position to bounce back from those inevitable threats and impacts that we're going to experience. And there are lots of different ways to do that depending on the situation on the ground.
Right. And when we talk about erosion, we've seen it, I think, a lot over on our north side. The Blish Point area comes to mind right off the bat, or even Sandy Neck, where we're constantly trucking in sand every year to build back the beaches. But we're even seeing some of the water encroaching into our ponds and lakes. The water level's much higher than it used to be.
Right, right.
So as the Cape Cod Commission and as a natural resource specialist, how do you help towns kind of like grapple with these are big problems and big solutions are needed, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've been working on a couple of different initiatives over the last couple of years. One of the biggest in terms of time and staff commitment is the Resilient Cape Cod project. This is a NOAA-funded 3-year project where we really tried to improve understanding of coastal process, help the community better understand coastal processes, the threats we face, and some of the strategies that are available to us, specifically here on Cape Cod, that we could take. So I could talk a little bit about that in more detail if you're interested. Last year, really, we started a series of stakeholder workshops across the Cape, but a couple of them were held here in the town of Barnstable. And the idea was, over the course of 3 different meetings, to help those participants understand what are the threats that we face, how does the coastal system work even, because that's, I think, something that not everybody, even though we live here in Cape Cod, not everybody understands completely. So that's a really important element. And then to sort of play out, illustrate for them what are some of the tools that we have available to us. Things that people maybe immediately might think about are building a seawall or a revetment to protect their property, but I'm sure many people here in Barnstable have also heard about efforts to put sand on the beach and called beach nourishment. That is sort of a soft solution, a method to protect coastal properties through a sort of a more natural approach. And there are a whole range of other strategies available to us that are sort of between that hard revetment solution and that soft beach nourishment solution. So we're trying to help communities understand what those options are and what the effects of those options might be in different settings. So another part of that Resilient Cape Cod project is building a tool, an online tool. We're almost ready to go live with that, probably later this spring. And the tool will help a user sort of zoom in on a particular area that they want to think about, apply one of these strategies, and the tool will help illustrate what are some of the effects that you might see from applying that strategy. So if you're going to do a salt marsh restoration, for example, what are the benefits associated with that and potentially impacts that you might see? How does that compare to another solution that might be a little bit more, have a harder impact on the environment, but might trade-off wise have benefits to protecting public infrastructure or private properties?
That's really interesting, and I have to say, as an old technologist and web developer, some of the tools that the Commission has developed over the years are just unbelievable. Even for lay people to go up there and to actually, you know, the MVP comes to mind right off the bat, is that you can see the effects of certain solutions before you go out and kind of cost these out. You can say, okay, what do we want to do with this? Would this work here? What's the ramifications of using this type of product or this type of solution? So with the resiliency project, when you're talking stakeholders, that's your towns and the officials in the towns, but even regular folks out there can do things to help mitigate and adapt to coastal resiliency?
Definitely. I mean, I think you know, the range again is, are we talking about an individual's personal property, or are we talking about how an individual is engaged with the town and taking action to support certain kinds of projects that are important for the community as a whole? So, you know, just in terms of thinking about your own private property, if you're fortunate enough to have coastal property, my bias would be to try to think about the whole range of impacts associated with you know, protecting your property. Not just your immediate interests, which are very important. Clearly people have invested a lot in their coastal properties, but what are the impacts associated with those strategies? And try to think more about the soft solutions. I think most consultants these days are trying to, you know, steer people toward the soft solutions. They're easier to permit, et cetera. But then in terms of individuals, you know, supporting town efforts to improve coastal resiliency, you know, if you're able to be an engaged citizen and come to hearings or go to workshops, you know, get yourself better informed about how these different approaches work, or show up to town council meetings and say, I really think that this is an important way to approach this problem. You know, whether it's, you know, changes at Sandy Neck or Blish Point or other parts of town where the community is needing to take some action.
Right. And talk a little bit about, I've had Elizabeth Jenkins, our Director of Planning and Development here, talk a little bit about the MVP program.
Yes.
You know, I know that's something that Barnstable's working very, very hard towards, and the Commission obviously is helping all the towns here on the Cape Cod to really kind of come to grips with you know, coastal resiliency and getting ready for it. How does that program work, and how does the Commission help towns?
Sure. That's another one of the areas I was going to touch on, so that's perfect. MVP, so this is a different MVP.
Right.
Cape Cod Commission has their watershed MVP. The state, a few years back, rolled out their Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, and I'm glad you've had Elizabeth here to talk about that. It's a really great program that the state is putting a lot of resources towards. They've provided a grant to the town of Barnstable and many of the Cape communities now to conduct a resiliency planning process, really. And Cape Cod Commission is certified to facilitate these workshops and planning processes with towns, and we're working with the town of Barnstable on a workshop that is scheduled for the end of this month, on the 29th. Elizabeth should be getting something up on the town website soon about that if people are interested in participating in that. The idea with the workshop is to talk about, identify the vulnerabilities that the community is facing. And really, here on Cape Cod, I think most communities are talking about their coastal vulnerabilities, but it could be other kinds of vulnerabilities. And to talk about also the opportunities that, what are the strengths that you have in the town of Barnstable already? And then looking at those vulnerabilities and those strengths in small work groups in this workshop format, people brainstorm ideas about, well, how could we improve our resiliency to those threats, and thinking both about the threats, the vulnerabilities, and you know, what are the strengths that we have in our community? Some of those strengths might just be, you know, good neighborhood associations. There are lots of civic associations here in the town. So, you know, utilizing those to help communication between neighbors. But then more concrete things like identifying, okay, this part of town, we really need to take some action to protect this bridge or this culvert, which is making us vulnerable to flooding or some other threat. So the result of the MVP program is a plan of identified actions. The group comes together at the end of the workshop day to identify priorities, and those priorities go into a plan, gets submitted back to the state, and makes the town eligible for funding. The state has put a bunch of money toward action grants for communities. So it's a great program.
Right, and it's funny that, you know, not everybody thinks that it's economic development, but it really is, because
Definitely.
we need to protect areas, obviously, for economic development, but also some of these projects that might come from this will produce jobs.
Definitely, definitely.
So there's you know, there's the yin and the yang of climate resiliency. I find it fascinating that it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Right?
Great, a great way to couch it it completely. There's opportunity both in the construction of these projects, the maintenance of these projects often, and then sort of bigger picture is, you know, if we're protecting our natural resources and our coastline, that is a huge part of what makes Cape Cod thrive and run. It's why people want to live here, work here, visit here.
Right.
So.
We have time for one more, or anything else at the Commission that you want to talk about today?
Well, there are some sort of related projects that we've been working on that I think sort of spin-offs from both the Resilient Cape Cod and the MVP projects that might be of interest, sort of targeted. Recently, have heard from the real estate community that they're interested in better understanding what these threats and vulnerabilities are, and some of the actions that homeowners could take. So we're rolling out a few realtor targeted workshops to help that community better understand all of the issues around coastal resiliency. And then some colleagues of mine are also working on helping people understand about protecting historic properties in the floodplain.
Sarah Korjeff.
Was
yeah,
Sarah
she came
here?
in.
Oh, great. Okay, good. So yeah, Sarah's terrific, and
Yeah.
she's been working with another smart person working for the county, Shannon Jarbeau, who's the community rating system specialist. That's a complicated term for basically she knows everything about what goes on in the floodplain.
She does. She's wonderful.
Yeah. So they've been doing some workshops specifically targeted at helping folks who own historic properties better protect them. And they're available to do more of those. And I think that's a resource that people should be aware of. It's also a threat that I think not everyone has really thought about, that some of the character of Cape Cod really is wrapped up in our historic communities, and many of them are threatened.
Right. How can people find more information about some of the programs that you're working on, or some of these meetings?
So on the Cape Cod Commission website. I'll say with a little bit of a smirk, because it's a little bit difficult to navigate the Commission website at the present time. There's a lot of information on there. We're about to roll out a brand new website.
Okay.
But that said, if you Google Resilient Cape Cod, the link to the Cape Cod Commission Resilient Cape Cod webpage will come up, and there are a lot of resources there that I think people will find very interesting. In addition to, when the tool is rolled out, the Cape Cod Coastal Planner should be available through that link as well.
Well, we'll have somebody back, maybe yourself, to come back and demo that product for us, because again, some of the technology coming out of the Commission is absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it is. We have a great group of developers. They're terrific. So
Excellent. Thanks so much, Heather.
thank you very much.
In our theme of preparing for the effects of a changing climate, we talked to Elizabeth Jenkins about the efforts to become an MVP community. Climate resiliency is important to the town of Barnstable. With me today, Director of Planning, Elizabeth Jenkins. There's all sorts of things moving along for the MVP program through the Commission. Tell us what MVP stands for. I'll make you say the whole words. And then really, there's an event coming up on March 29th, and this is really to get Barnstable on the program. So tell us a little bit about what it is and what the program is.
Sure. Hi, Paula. It's great to be here again. So the town of Barnstable was fortunate enough to be a recipient of a state grant program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. And this is part of Charlie Baker's $300 million initiative to address climate and coastal resiliency issues around the state of Massachusetts. So we were one of multiple communities across the state and on Cape Cod who received this grant. And it's a planning grant, so the intention is to engage communities, community stakeholders, those sort of with technical knowledge in your community, to really understand the vulnerabilities of your municipality to natural hazards and climate hazards, and then work together to develop an action plan and priorities for responding to these. So we do have an event coming up. We have it scheduled now for March 29th. It's going to be sort of an all-day immersive event. If folks are really interested in getting, again, engaged and helping to literally create the plan for dealing with these issues here in the town of Barnstable, can come and join us and participate in this workshop.
They'll be well fed.
That's correct. We do realize a one-day commitment is a substantial commitment to take out of people's time. We scheduled it on a Friday. Hopefully, some people have some flexibility around that.
Right.
We will, of course, provide breakfast and lunch and snacks to sort of again keep people engaged and reflect this timetable. But this is what there's sort of a format that the state lays out that every single town that participates in this, and again there are literally hundreds of municipalities participating in this sort of formula process to identify these issues in our community and then develop again sort of a prioritized action plan of their concerns. So as a recipient of the grant, we had the opportunity to bring on a group to help us with this. It's not, because it is such a heavy lift, it's not just town staff that does all this work. So we've contracted with the staff from the Cape Cod Commission, as well as the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Woods Hole Sea Grant, who have been, both of those agencies, just fantastic partners in climate resilience projects with the town of Barnstable in the past. So we're really looking forward to working with them again. They're going to come in and facilitate this event on March 29th. And help us meet the requirements of this really exciting grant program.
So when we talk about identifying natural hazards and then prioritizing some of those risks, let's talk about what are some of those hazards, so people understand that if they want to come to this is what they're going to actually kind of think and determine.
Sure. So I think when most people think about climate resiliency, they're thinking about coastal resiliency issues. We are obviously a coastal community, and we deal with a lot of the impacts of that. So things like major storms, hurricane, and then the sort of impacts of those: coastal erosion, flooding, storm surge. Those are kind of the big ones that we get. But then there are other ones that perhaps don't get as much don't get as much attention, but present some real vulnerabilities in Barnstable. Those might be things like wildfires or forest fires. We're actually a very high-risk forest fire community. We do a lot of work with our conservation program in our natural areas to try to address some of those risks. So we're really going to look at the range of things. Again, there will probably be sort of an emphasis on coastal resiliency issues, because I think those are our most prominent. But we really want to look at that full spectrum of vulnerability, so people have an awareness and an understanding of it, but also because we want to, again, in our sort of action plan, be able to address the full scope of those risks.
Right. And then talk a little bit about prioritizing risks. It seems like they're all like really important. You know, when I was taught to do a to-do list, it was A1 is important, B1 not so much, C could wait to the next day, and empty the trash could be on the to-do list forever. So when you're looking at that prioritizing, you know, is it business orientated, is it economic development orientated, or is it just the coast itself?
Yeah, so the idea is that we look at these risks and vulnerabilities through multiple lenses. So there are sort of three different frameworks through which we'll do this analysis. The first one will be sort of analysis of infrastructure and the built environment. The second one through an environmental lens, and then the third one through a social lens, how it affects people and how we as a community can build our own resilience through interrelationships or response, the way we respond to disasters. So we want to take each one of these issues that our community faces and break it down and think about the risks in sort of each one of those three areas. And then that helps us to start to understand when it comes to protecting people, when it comes to protecting our environment, when it comes to protecting the structures and the investments we have here, how to start to balance and prioritize those.
Right. And you had mentioned that, you know, committees and commissions and board members that are currently sitting right now here at the town of Barnstable, this is a really good vehicle for them to do a deep dive into this issue. But what about the regular resident, the citizen that's out there and going, yeah, I got a kind of a inkling of what this means to me. Should they attend to this?
So we certainly invite anybody to register for the event. I think the broader sort of participation we can have in this, again, you know, we're not starting the conversation here in Barnstable. Coastal resiliency, climate resiliency are issues that we've talked about for a long time, but again, I think this is an important step forward in the process. So yeah, if you're just a regular resident and are really sort of interested in moving climate resiliency and coastal resiliency issues forward, this would be a great way to come and sort of learn if you don't know, or if you do know, sort of put your voice in the process. So we have information and sign up available on the Planning and Development Department website. I'm sure that's going to be announced through all of our typical channels, so look for that announcement coming forward, and then there's a site you can register on.
So they're going to register for it at the Planning and Development site. It's March 29th, and you're pretty much all day.
Pretty much all day. There'll be more specifics. If you want more specifics, you can go to that webpage and check them out. But it is a full day commitment. We understand if people can't make it all day, but you know, we ask you to sort of attend as much as possible so you can sort of see the full picture. And you know, I think it's going to be, again, sort of a great opportunity to work with our partners, some of our community and regional partners in resilience. And you know, again, sort of really looking forward to their perspective and their expertise on this, and to move this important issue forward in Barnstable.
Great, this is fantastic. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks, Paula.
Blish Point is an area that has been affected by rising seas and damage from stronger storms. We get an update from the Department of Public Works and their efforts for sand replenishment. Construction at Blish Point is well underway. With me today, Amanda Ruggiero, DPW engineer. This project kind of happened sooner rather than later. Give us a little indication of what happened at Blish Point.
Well, last year there were 3 major events that occurred, and they basically swiped away the sand that was covering these bags that stabilized the bank. When that happened, those were exposed, which is a huge vulnerability to Bush Point. So back in November, the town appropriated some funds, and we were able to expedite a bid package to get sand back onto the beach.
So when we talk about how this is kind of done, the actual damage, this is more of a maintenance project than a mitigation or adaptation program for climate change.
Correct, yeah. There's a monitoring and maintenance plan that was developed as part of the original construction in 2015. And when written in that part of it, it says that you'll have to restore the sand along the beach. On an annual basis, it would be minor, but if a major storm event happened and there was storm surge, then that would displace more of the sand. They would expect it to be about 5 to 7 years. Unfortunately, because of the major events we had, it's only been about 3 years.
Wow, that seems a little tough for residents there because it's so vulnerable that water is just coming through their neighborhoods. So when we look at the timeline, where are you in the construction project now?
So construction began in January. We were able to finalize a contract. We had an expectation that it needed to be completed by the end of January, and that hopes was that we would get all the sand placed before any major event happened. And we were able and were successful to get that portion completed by the end of January.
Okay. Are there other pieces of that project that will be scheduled?
Yes, the other parts of the maintenance would be to replenish the beach grass on the bank, and then the second part would be to put in a more robust snow fence because the initial snow fence was washed away.
Right. Are there other vulnerable areas like this in the town of Barnstable?
Well, similar to Bush Point, Sandy Neck, they're also designated to be within the velocity zone designated by FEMA. So those are all susceptible to waves. So anyone within the velocity zone is susceptible. And Bush Point, because this solution is a soft solution, requires more maintenance to replace the sand.
Okay. And the funding mechanisms for something like this, is it just all in the town to try to do this, or were there other funding sources?
For the ongoing maintenance, that would be appropriated funds through the town. Like I said, the interval was expected to be a little bit longer, so the town now is evaluating the longer term items for this area so that the cost for adding the sand, which is all sacrificial, can be kind of eliminated or mitigated and have another alternative.
Right. And will FEMA actually visit this site?
Yes, so the March storm of last year was designated under federal program, and they will be providing a site visit in the middle of February.
Excellent. Do you have a message for residents? I know that a lot of them were very concerned with whether the work was going to get done before the next winter hit. Do you have a message for them?
The DPW is continuing to explore different options and evaluate what is there. We will be, cognizant of the beach and keeping an eye on that if anything needs to be replaced. At this point, the sand that has been placed is above the high water, so that sand should stay there. If a major event does happen, we'll be monitoring to see how much sand is displaced.
Excellent. Comments, suggestions, accolades? Connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. Email us or send us an old-fashioned note by carrier pigeon. Channel 18 works for you. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.